Hey, it's Colin Meeks. Welcome to another edition of the Financial Advocate Podcast. I'm sort of going to go back to my roots today and talk about some long term care planning. And the reason I think this is important to bring up now at this point in the year, we're heading into the holidays. Thanksgiving's already passed, but this is the time of the year when we spend a lot of time with family and we see people that we may not have seen, that frequently over the year. And you may start to notice, hey, mom or dad's slowing down a little bit, or they're not able to physically do things that they used to do, or mentally they're not as sharp as they used to be. Um, and you just start to think, hey, what happens if they can't take care of themselves anymore? What planning options are available? And when I say go back to my roots, I actually started selling long-term care insurance back in 1994 when I first got out of college. So something I'm very familiar with. I've you know done it over the years. It's always been parts of the plans that we do for our clients here. So I just wanted to do a high level overview of just some planning options that you have. And when typically when people hear long-term care planning, the first thing is they do is they go to, well, I can't, the insurance. I've heard the long-term care insurance is really expensive. It's not any good. Um, and it's not for me. So I just want to sort of step back and give there's three basic ways that long-term care gets paid for. So I want to go through those and just give you a little insight on those. And hopefully, as I'm going through this, you'll be able to say, maybe what applies to your situation and what doesn't. And again, it is on a case by case basis. When we meet with clients and we do their financial plans, we always talk about long term care insurance and or not long term care insurance, long term care planning, and see what the best way for them to go about it is. Couple of statistics. Genworth does some pretty cool studies on long term care planning, and if you Google that Genworth long-term care study, you'll be able to see a lot of these. So I'm not gonna hit a lot of them, but um, whatever in this area, and I'm in the Baltimore area, cost of care if you're in a nursing facility is right around $10,000 a month. Depending on the facility, I've seen it a couple $1,000s more, a couple $1,000s less. But Genworth has this really cool map where you can go all across the country and just sort of hover over different areas, and you can see the cost of care of different areas, and you'll see them, as high in New York City, maybe of $25,000 a month, and then in some of the rural areas out west are, significantly less than that. Um, Average stay is around 2 to 3 years. And again, that's an average. We've all heard stories of people that go into a nursing home and maybe pass away quickly. We've heard stories of somebody that goes in there with maybe a mental situation where Alzheimer's or something like that, where they live years and years and years. So everybody's situation is different. They just try to pin the averages. The thing is, there's 1.3 million people in nursing homes right now in the United States, and if you were to go in there and ask, number one, who wants to be here, and number two, who planned to be here, you probably wouldn't see a whole lot of hands. It's not something that everybody wants to sit down and talk about, plan for. It's just not one of those nice things. So has to be done though. It can have a huge economic impact on families. Aside from that, $10,000 a month, people in the sandwich generation, like I am, I'm in my mid 50s. We're raising kids, but also mom and dad are sick. We're sort of trying to help take care of them, and the amount of financial toll it takes on people that are they have to stop working, they have to take more of their vacation. The emotional toll it can take on families, just all boiled into one. It's just it can create chaos in a family. So the key is if you can plan a little bit for it and get out ahead of it, then you're really helping yourself out. Um, the One of the things that people get really confused about is what actually the types of things that would pay for long-term care. And they don't find this out ahead of time. They find it out as they're going through it. They'll think, well, there's Medicare, and or mom and dad had a really good health plan through work, so that's going to carry over. They were a veteran. There's VA benefits. They had group disability from their employer. They worked for the government. Um, any of those types of coverages are great for what they're designed to do, and that's to take care of you in the short term for acute type things. What people quickly realize is after a couple of months, when somebody's in a long-term care facility or needing long-term care, all those benefits sort of go away. They run out after 100 days. They're pretty much done. And then that leaves you with these three options that we're going to talk about, how to pay for the rest of it. And the first option, either on purpose or by default, is what everybody does, is they plan to self-pay. And self-paying is, it's just one of those things. At $10,000 a month, how many people out there can afford to do it? If we take an average couple who I work with, it's a husband and wife, and both of them are collecting Social Security. They might have a pension, and they might have a nice investment portfolio they've saved and a paid for house. That they might seem like they're sitting pretty. If they have $500,000 or $1 million in a portfolio, and $7,000 to $8,000 a month of income coming in, that is a very comfortable retirement. But when it does not get comfortable is if one of the two of them were to need any sort of home care, assisted living, adult daycare, nursing home coverage, because to try to generate, that $10,000 to $15,000 a month to pay for the care, in addition to the other spouse that's not needing care, still needs to maintain their lifestyle. It will come to a head, and eventually the money will run out. So self-paying for long-term care is really good for folks that have a big portfolio, maybe a lot of income, and a lot more than that $7,000 to $8,000 a month. They might have a couple $1 million there, and they can afford that 10 to $15,000 a month care bill. But it really hits the average Joe in a way that is going to really mess things up for their surviving spouse. So self-pay is one way. Next way is long-term care insurance. And like I said at the beginning, I sold my first long-term care policy back in 1994. And if you think about this is crazy. I was going back and looking at some of the older policies that I sold. We would write policies that paid $100 a day for nursing home coverage, and that's $3,000 a month, and that was enough. 1994. I mean, how long ago was that? 30 years ago. That was enough to cover 1 month in a nursing home, and then we would add inflation on it so that the benefit would bump up a little bit each year. And as healthcare costs rose, the policy would rise in line with that. $3,000 a month. I mean, that's crazy. The policies have changed significantly since then. Back then there was 5 to 10 decent carriers that wrote long-term care insurance. Right now, there's maybe one or two. There are different kinds of policies. The knock on long-term care insurance was, number one, it's too expensive. And number two, what happens to all this money if I don't use it? If I pass away and say I paid into a policy for 10 or 15 years, what happens to those thousands of dollars? So what the industry has tried to do is create these hybrid policies where it's a life insurance slash long-term care policy slash has some cash value in it, so that no matter what, you're going to get something back. And those are actually worth looking at now. And we do look at those for clients in our financial plans. But the days of just a straight long-term care policy, they're not over, but the policies have gotten kind of expensive, and they don't cover as well as they used to. So you really have to pick and choose what you're looking at if you decide that long-term care insurance is the way to go. As with any of this kind of planning, the earlier you start looking at it, the more options you have, and the better those options are, and the less expensive those options are. The closer you get to an actual crisis or a care stay, that's when a lot of the options aren't there anymore. I mean, obviously, you can't buy long-term care insurance the day before you're going to go into a nursing home, so that option sort of goes away. So that sort of brings me to the third one, and that's this Medicaid planning. And Medicaid planning involves an attorney usually, and they're trying to engineer your assets to show the state government that, hey, you have assets in the range that they'll cover for your long-term care bills. And it's kind of brutal. For a single person to qualify for Medicaid in Maryland, you can have about $2,500 in assets. Everything else has to be that you have to show them, hey, it's gone, it's spent. The next thing is income, and you can only have about $100 a month in income. So your Social Security, your pension, whatever other income you have, sort of has to go to, not sort of, it does have to go to pay for your care, and then Medicaid will fill in the blank. So if you're single, it's kind of brutal. For married couples, it's a little less brutal. And if it's a married couple, you can have around $160,000 in assets. They're not going to kick the spouse out of the home, so you can keep the home. There are some income levels that can be maintained to keep what they call the communal spouse in their standard of living. But everything else has to be spent down. So if you take, if you have a $500,000 or $1 million, I mean, to get from there down to 160,000, that's a pretty significant spending. And I can tell you, it's not the kind of planning that, after sitting across a table with dozens of families over the years, it's not really the kind of planning that you want to be doing. I call it crisis planning because you're selling assets that you don't want to sell. You're cashing things in. You're paying taxes that you might not want to pay because you're cashing those things in. If the stock market is not, if it's low when you sell, you don't really have a choice in the matter. You just sort of have to have like a fire sale to get your assets down under those limits. And it's a whirlwind. Sitting across the table from somebody going through Medicaid planning is it's tough because you're looking at them and their whole financial life is sort of flashing before their eyes, and what they've worked 30 or 40 or 50 years to get to within the period of a month or two has to be completely re-engineered to sort of I guess go under the limbo bar. And I forgot to mention they do look back 5 years. So if you're doing Medicare planning and that check that you wrote to your son or daughter 3 years ago for $20,000, or that property that you transferred into their name a couple of years ago because you were told to do that, Medicaid will catch that. And there's a calculation that they use to disqualify you for benefits just a little bit further. So you can't just give away all your assets and just show up and say, hey, I don't have anything. They're very smart, and they're going to go back and look through things. And after going through this not only with clients but with family members, I can tell you it's it's a lot of paperwork. They're looking through bank statements and investment statements and property deeds and your whole financial life for the last 5 years. And there's this thing called a Medicaid annuity, and that's sort of where I come in with the Medicaid planning. I will work with the attorney or paralegal that's doing the Medicaid planning. And so Medicaid planning is, it's a combination of that plus the Medicaid annuity, and just, it's okay to do in crisis, because if it's your only option, then you sort of have to do it. But it's not an option that I would consider, hey, I don't have to do anything now because I know that there's this wonderful thing called Medicaid planning at the, when the time comes. So those are it. The long-term care, again, it's not real fun to talk about. The earlier you start, the more options and the better options you have, and usually the options get cheaper. Obviously with any kind of insurance, the earlier you buy, the better the premiums are. The cheaper the premiums are, the better the options are. You have better chance of getting a preferred rate as opposed to maybe a rated rate because you're healthier. So planning early for this kind of stuff, although it's not one of those fun things we like to talk about, it still is a very viable part of a good financial plan. So you do have options. If you are going through the holidays and you see, things are just a little off and you want somebody to talk to, feel free to get in touch with our office. You can email me or call or hit me up on the website. We'll throw a couple of resources up to this podcast with some of the numbers that we talked about and links to the care studies. But yeah, long-term care planning is one of those things. You got to do it. You don't have to do it, but if you don't do it, then you might be forced into one of those options that aren't the best for you. So that's it for this podcast. I hope you got something out of it. And if you have any questions, feel free to give me a call. Thanks.